Welcome to Tar Heel People, the show in which your friends and neighbors in North Carolina share interesting and useful information. And now, with today's guest, here's your host, Gene Kitchen.
Welcome to Tar Heel People, and we are really excited about our guest today. Lou Ebert is the CEO and President of the North Carolina Chamber, and this is the first time you've been on Tar Heel People.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Well, thank you, and you should have been on before, as a matter of fact, because what you do representing the business people in North Carolina is huge. I'm recently sold the business for which I work, but sure. We rely on you all working behind the scenes to help the business climate in North Carolina. So thank you for all you do.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, and actually, as the state's largest statewide business advocacy organization, we have close to 35,000 members, but of all sizes, so small, medium, and large. And it kind of puts us in a position to be the largest broad-based business group. Mm-hmm. So when we weigh in at the Capitol on issues that affect business, legislators pay attention because we bring that point of view, because I think they're increasingly concerned about how do issues impact the job creators. Mm-hmm. There's things that come up that could be harmful that we're able to weigh in on. There's also things that we think ought to happen that will be positive to create the environment to create jobs in our state.
And the legislators don't have the time to do all the background work and whatnot. So when you come in and you've already done all the research and you can sure. Show them why this would work and why that doesn't work and tell them what they're doing in other states and best practices and stuff, I mean, you're a tremendous educational benefit for them.
Thanks. And that's a benefit of the kind of resources we're able to put together as an organization. So this is probably the only business organization in the state that has the policy framework to do the research and studies, the advocacy horsepower to drive those ideas at the legislature, and then the political action activity to reinforce legislators who, in our opinion, do the right thing. But to your point, it kind of highlights the fact that in a state that effectively has a part-time legislature, mm-hmm. Many of these folks have businesses, they have jobs when the legislature is not in session. So increasingly they rely on advocacy organizations like the North Carolina Chamber to help them understand complex mm-hmm. issues. And we're involved in a lot of issues that are very complicated. They have mm-hmm. long-reaching future implications for our state. And hopefully when we weigh in with our information and studies and policy, we're providing a valuable resource to help them hopefully make the right choices for North Carolina's future.
And so much, Lou, of what we hear is growing jobs, more jobs, how to attract businesses, and for them to have you as a resource to do that. I know a lot of my friends who have ended up in the legislature were former educators, sure. or from a variety of different backgrounds, but when Bill Daltridge, whose daughter works for you and is now in the cabinet, of course, with Governor McCrory, but when he was in the Senate, he was the only MBA, or maybe he was representative, but he was the only MBA mm-hmm. serving. And so to bring that expertise and that knowledge is so important that you all provide that.
It is, and we've had a tough decade and a half in North Carolina. Mm-hmm. I think people look back at the year 2000, and between now and then, it's kind of been a lost decade for our mm-hmm. state. We've had limited job growth, in fact, in some areas, no net job creation. And that growth deficit that Dr. Mike Walden mm-hmm. told me about a while back is very troubling because mm-hmm. we've seen the impacts of a global economy on North Carolina, which is a big change since the 90s. We've probably been a little complacent as a state. I think we've kind of thought we don't have to grow as fast as other states, and we've probably paid the price for that. I think we've also recognized along the way, believe it or not, North Carolina has had no plan. There's been no plan mm-hmm. to grow the economy. So in the 90s, we were growing nicely, but basically, when this governor took office, I think he asked for a copy of the plan, and the only plan that they could find was a 1985 plan.
Wow.
So when you think about North Carolina as now the 9th largest state in America, mm-hmm. and actually as a freestanding economy, we'd be the 28th largest economy in the world, effectively had no plan. So that's where I think the business community had to kind of jump in and say, hey, we can figure mm-hmm. this out. And actually, that's how things work in North Carolina. The business community usually jumps in, and when it comes time mm-hmm. to really tackle the big issues, mm-hmm. The North Carolina Chamber and the business community usually have been right there with the big ideas, the big solutions, and really the heavy kind of lift that's required to move our state forward. And I think on this one, Gene, they've kind of recognized that if we have this job creation problem, and we're not going to kid ourselves, how do we put North Carolina in a better position to grow? And the exciting part about where we're going as a state, notwithstanding some of the challenges, is we have a lot of people moving here. So by 2030, 3 million more people will be in our state. The plan we've developed calls for creating 1 million new jobs. Places like Raleigh and Charlotte will likely double in population.
Double?
So
Wow.
think about the opportunity that creates. And most states would love to be in that situation. Many states are facing flatline or decline. North Carolina is still about the 4th fastest growing state in America.
And I heard that recently. I mean, that's amazing. 4th fastest growing state in America.
Yeah. Well, and when you think about it, we've built on all the assets that North Carolina offers, aside from the physical, the climate, the coast, and the mountains, but the university system, the education system, the talent development assets in this state are extraordinary. And again, you have a kind of a business concentration here too, where a lot of activities happening. So part of our goal and part of our plan is how do we accelerate that? So how do we accelerate job growth in our state and really put North Carolina in the best position to compete for the future?
Well, we're going to talk about the 4 pillars of what the plan for 2030, and I think it's great that y'all looked that far out. But before we do, let me ask you, because we're talking about Raleigh, and we're talking about Charlotte, and we're talking about the big population areas. What about the rural areas? Would they be brought in on this plan too?
The way we've identified our plan, it's not an urban against rural, it's really a North Carolina plan. So that, the state will continue to grow economically, GDP will continue to grow, and we think that has broad implications for the whole state. I think where we intersect with local chambers that are very valuable in our business model, each local chamber is developing their plan for their community. But I think when we look at the way we've approached our plan, and we spent a couple of years talking to business people across the state, including chambers and associations, and what we've identified are those 4 big areas you alluded to that most people recognize if we get these 4 issues right, North Carolina can be a great place to live, work, and do business regardless of where you live. So education and talent is critical. Need to have a competitive business climate, which actually is urban and rural. So if we can compete as a state, we can compete anywhere. We need to invest in infrastructure so to have the tools that enable growth. And then entrepreneurship and innovation matter too. And that's actually where some rural communities might have a real leg up, because the kind of innovation and the kind of entrepreneurial activity that can happen across the state, those businesses can be anywhere. You were talking earlier about craft breweries, for example. I mean, that can happen anywhere. So I think you got a state with tons of possibilities and tons of assets. And I think what we're trying to do with our plan is make sure that you can have smart choices being made at the legislature. But it also recognizes that other states aren't waiting for North Carolina to kind of catch up. And so I think you have states aggressively targeting growth and job creation. Not to disparage Washington, but I think any state hoping that Washington will solve this problem for them won't necessarily like how that ends either. So I think you have a state that's being very proactive and very intentional about the kind of future we want to have for North Carolina.
Speaking of a lot of the talent we have here, I heard at one point that the largest concentration of PhDs in the world is in the Triangle. I mean, with State, Chapel Hill, and Duke. So we do have a lot of brain power here that we can tap into.
Absolutely.
On various things. Well, let's start with, you mentioned the 4 pillars, the education and talent supply. Why is that so important, and kind of what does that encompass, Lou?
The interesting thing about the 4 things we've just mentioned here, I would suggest to you, first of all, business people agree that these are the things we have to get right. But for the most part, regardless of party, most Republicans and Democrats would say, yep, those are the right things. So I think we've come up on 4 things that aren't partisan. They don't separate folks. They really kind of bring folks together. And I think that's real important as a state, because when I look at what's happening around the country, education and talent is really the new coin of the realm for economic activity. The states that have the kind of concentration that you've referred to of talent and brain power are really the ones that will be the big winners in the future. Sure, there's discussion about incentives and what draws business in, but companies don't go where the talent doesn't exist.
Right, and even Google has said, we are one of the up-and-coming states, so they're investing in us.
Absolutely, and the kind of companies you see moving to our state, talent, when you talk to companies that move here like MetLife and others, usually when you ask them why you here, education and talent is usually the top of the list. Because companies in this global economy can do business around the world. So they have a vast range of talent they can attract and go to. So the heavy concentration of talent we have in North Carolina is a plus, but figuring out how to develop more of that and grow it faster and be more agile, I think is some of the challenges that we're trying to address as a state. The skills gap is a big challenge. As a big manufacturing state, how do we continue to make sure that not only do we have the PhDs and the MBAs, but some of the basic skills that manufacturers right now in North Carolina have 50 to 60,000 jobs sitting empty.
They do.
Because, and many of these, Gina, are in places where there's high unemployment. So in Hickory, they can't find welders. So there's basic skills that are required too. So I think the combination of closing the skills gap in manufacturing jobs, for high skill, high wage jobs, as well as some of the high tech, high skilled jobs, puts North Carolina in a great position to compete.
So do you work then, or does North Carolina Chamber then work with the public school system, with the community colleges, with the higher education networks across and say, this is where we have needs? I know in our area where I live, Nash Rocky Mount, or in Edgecombe County, the community colleges are very proactive in trying to teach the skills.
Exactly. In fact, an initiative we're rolling out shortly in the next couple of months is something called the Certified Work-Ready Communities Initiative. And we're actually going to be going around the state and certifying, hopefully every community in North Carolina as certified skills ready. And again, the point of that is to put these communities in the best possible position to make sure the school district, the community college, the chamber, the economic developers are all working together to kind of close that skills gap. That's not always the case. So I think that's a great opportunity locally. So at the state level, I think we're providing some opportunity to recognize that. But again, when we look at areas of high unemployment, in many cases, there's skilled jobs that can't be filled. So how do you match up that? And again, that's a pretty immediate and urgent opportunity. In some parts of the state, I think as many as 18 counties have seen 20 to 25% of their jobs go away since the turn of the century. So in some communities, it's a real desperate situation.
Well, I hope that the people in those areas are grabbing onto this and taking advantage of what you're offering. We're going to take a break and we're going to finish that and then talk about the other three pillars. So stay with us, please. Thank you for staying with us. Lou Ebert, who is the CEO and President of North Carolina Chamber, is here. And I want to start with, I am so glad that a 2030 plan is in place because I love this state. I was born in Raleigh, lived here my whole life. And I want planned direction and growth, meaningful direction. And as you said, a lot of states are doing that, a lot aren't.
They are.
And we've got to do that. I mean, that's clearly the wise thing to do, and I'm glad that people who are business-minded are doing it.
Well, and I think what our leaders are passionate about is we got to find a situation where policy can trump politics. So how do you make sure the right thing's done for North Carolina, regardless of the politics? There needs to be a single business agenda, which we feel there is now. But probably the most important part of our work, because you referred to sometimes plans are done and not followed, our plan is ongoing, and the metrics that we're using to measure it are actually online. There's a dashboard 2030, so you can go on and look at the 4 key areas of our plan and look right now in real time, how do we compare and compete against every state in America? So we're being very transparent about where we're doing well and where we're not, but data is sort of a powerful tool that can drive change. So our plan is ongoing, it's not going away, and it's actually being measured every day.
And your website is great. I was reading a lot of it last night, and it really does. If someone is more interested, particularly like in education, they can read that part. But I enjoyed going through the whole thing, and I learned a lot by doing so. You had one more comment about education before we left that.
Well, I think another thing that, again, when you look at the business community taking the long view in education, we spent a lot of time and effort last year on something called the higher standards, what some people refer to as a Common Core. And again, it was the business community's way to kind of lean in very heavily and say, when we look at the future and the kind of jobs businesses need today, tomorrow, and in the long term, higher standards, more rigor, increased academic achievement are going to be absolutely critical. So we wanted to make sure our state was in the best position to compete long term. So that higher standards campaign was a real rallying point for the business community to say, when it comes time to thinking about our future, we need that increased academic rigor around STEM and reading and all subjects. So again, very important for the skills of the future. We have to be developing that talent right now in our schools.
And we are doing a show also today with Keith Poston, who is going to talk about the public school forum or public forum for North Carolina, and they are helping